proposal to ban high-capacity magazine. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank my colleague from Florida for those very thoughtful remarks, and of course, my colleague and senior senator from Connecticut. We're here on the floor today to help lead a discussion about how this nation can finally own up to its responsibility to take on the scourge of gun violence that has certainly been highlighted by the massacre in Sandy Hook that I spoke about earlier today in my first speech before this chamber, but has frankly become too routine throughout the streets of this country, with 3,000-4,000 people losing their lives to gun violence since Sandy Hook happened. And lost in a lot of the debate here about the particular policy prescriptions that we're talking about, whether it be universal background checks supported by 90% of Americans, or a ban on high-capacity magazines supported by 2/3 of Americans, or a federal law ending illegal gun trafficking supported by 3/4 of Americans. Lost amidst all of the political back and forth over negotiations between Republicans and Democrats, the pronouncements of the NRA and of gun control groups. Lost amidst all of that debate about politics and policy are the victims. The victims are the people, boys and girls, men and women, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, who die every single day in this country. I described it this morning like raindrops. It's just background noise to this country now, the number of people who are dying every day. And so I decided that after having given my maiden speech this morning that I'd come back to this floor. Not to occupy the floor or commandeer the floor, but to the extent that there is time today and tomorrow and next week to spend time on this floor telling the stories of the victims. Telling the stories of the individual peoples whose lives were tragically cut short by guns. Because it happens here more so than almost every other nation in the world. More people lose their lives, more people have their lives ended prematurely because of guns here than almost any other corner of the world. And it's time that we do something about it. Yes, because of the aggregate numbers. Yes, because of the horror in Sandy Hook, but because every single additional life that's cut short is a failure of our responsibility to do something about it. And so I'm going to spend some time down here on the floor, in between others giving speeches today and tomorrow and next week, to talk about these victims, to just tell you a little bit about who they are, and especially for the little ones, maybe who they were going to be. So let me start in Newtown. Let me start in Sandy Hook. And we can put up some pictures of just a handful of the victims from Sandy Hook and from cities across this country. Let me start with the little guy in the middle here. Daniel Barden. I talked about him this morning. Daniel was a pretty amazing little boy. His parents talked about the unbelievable compassion that he had. I talked about it this morning, that he never failed to turn off a light when he left a room. He was always the kid in school that was sitting with the kid who didn't have anybody to sit with when his parents would leave a grocery store. They'd get halfway across the grocery store parking lot, turn around, and Daniel wasn't with them because he was still holding the door open for other people who were leaving the store. He was a pretty amazing little kid. He loved spending time with his family. He loved riding the waves of the beach. You can see with that long hair, he was a beach bum. Played drums in a band with his brother James and his sister Natalie. His family was really musical, and so on that morning, his father was a professional musician who's here this week, actually, taught him how to play Jingle Bells that morning. He woke up really early that morning, and it was funny because he was the last of the three kids to go to school. They were all in separate schools. And his parents thought this was strange, that morning he woke up early. In fact, it was the first day all year. This was December 14th, so they'd been in school for months. And it was the first day the entire year that Daniel had woken up before his oldest sibling went to school. And as the older sibling was walking down the driveway to go to school, Daniel ran after him, telling him that he loved him. First day. He'd never done that all year. But it just shows what a compassionate little kid Daniel was. I actually wear a bracelet for Daniel, and it's a bracelet that links to a Facebook page called What Would Daniel Do? It's got about 16,000 likes, and the point of this page, as you'll hear, frankly, about a lot of these kids, families have done amazing things to try to spread the word about who these kids were and who these kids were going to be. Daniel's page is What Would Daniel Do? And it's just a forum for people to, just invest in little acts of kindness to try to live up to the inspiration that this little 6-year-old set for his family and his neighborhood. So people posted stories on that website for the last several months about these little kind acts that they performed, like the woman who bought coffee and donuts for a firehouse in her home state of New York, or the Missouri woman who helped restock a food pantry in Daniel's honor, or the Illinois woman who just paid for a stranger's meal and on the back of the bill wrote "Love from Daniel Barton." Daniel's going to grow up to be a really, really amazing young man. Loved life, did amazing things for people. But we didn't get to know Daniel Barton later in life because he was gunned down that day in Sandy Hook. Let me tell you the story of someone equally amazing who we got to know for 20 more years than the kids that she was charged with looking after. But her name is one that you might know, and that's Victoria Soto. Victoria Soto was 27 years old. Was a teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And that's what she wanted to do. She had wanted to be a teacher, her mom said, since she was 3 years old. Imagine knowing what you want to do when you're 3 years old and sticking with it. A lot of people think they know what they want to do when they're 3. They change their mind, but she didn't. She worked every day from the time that she was 13 to get ready to be a teacher. As early as 13, she was charting out her classes so that she could ultimately be a teacher. And even when she got to Sandy Hook Elementary School, she made time for night classes at Southern Connecticut State University, where she was getting her master's degree in special education. A mentor of hers said that she was the last one who would have wanted hero status, but nobody was surprised to hear what she did in that classroom that day. When Adam Lanza walked into her classroom, Victoria Soto was the only person that he saw. Why? Because she had ushered her special education teacher, Anne Marie Murphy, and several of her kids under a desk. And she had pushed a number of other kids into a closet to hide them. When Lanza came into the classroom, he faced her and killed her. And then he killed the kids who were under the desk. The kids who hid in the closet, many of them lived. Many of them survived, were discovered after the incident because of the heroic actions of this one 27-year-old teacher. Imagine what she could have done with the rest of her life. Students loved her. Parents loved her. She was made for teaching. Think of all of the impact. She probably had 30 more years in the classroom. She had hundreds, if not thousands, of kids that she still could have touched with her life. Gone. Victoria Soto's genius as a teacher will no longer be able to be realized because of what happened that day. And if we don't do something about it, Victoria Soto won't be the last teacher who's going to be gunned down. If we don't take some steps here, this won't be the last selfless educator that we will mourn here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. Let me tell you about Charlotte Bacon, 6 years old. I lost count of the number of funerals and wakes that I went to, but I do remember Charlotte's funeral. She had this crazy head of curly red hair. She was described by her family as sweet and outgoing and exuberant, someone who was willing to argue for whatever she believed in, even at 6 years old. She loved the color pink, and she loved animals, any animal that she met, but she really loved her golden retriever. She wanted to become a veterinarian. A lot of these kids you'll hear today, they knew what they wanted to do with their lives. These were ambitious kids, in part because they had really special parents as well. She was really looking forward to Christmas because she wanted to show off this new pink dress and these pink boots that she had gotten. And it was a Christmas outfit, and so she was waiting until Christmas to be able to show it off. But on the morning of December 14th, and again, another theme you'll hear is that these strange things happened that morning. That morning she woke up and she wanted to wear that pink dress. She wanted to wear those pink boots, and her mother let her do it. She wore that special pink dress and those boots to school on Friday, December 14th. Her family has established a nonprofit called Newtown Kindness. The organization is comprised of community members who are trying to bring positivity and strength back to the Newtown community. I talked this morning about the fact that for many of us who have lived through this tragedy, not anywhere close to the way in which the victims' families have, what we see Newtown as defined by is not those 10 minutes of violence and evil, but by all of the millions of acts of humanity that have spilled forth from within the community and outside the community in the days and weeks since. And this is what Newtown Kindness is about. It's encouraging children to do their own acts of kindness like Charlotte did and submit their stories through drawings or letters to the organization. And Newtown Kindness is going to show some light on all of these little wonderful things that kids do every day in the same way that Charlotte did for the kids she loved and the family members she loved and for the animals that she loved. Let me talk a little bit about another teacher, Rachel Davino. Rachel was very much like Victoria in that she knew that she wanted to work with kids. She had a lot of interests, Rachel Davino did. She was born in Waterbury. She received her undergraduate degree from Hartford, and she got her master's from Post University. She loved animals. It's probably why she connected with a lot of these kids. She loved animals. She loved baking, photography, and karate. She drew lots of things. Loved to draw animals, dogs, frogs, anything with scales or feathers or fur. She loved to draw. But her passion really was working as a behavioral therapist, working with kids with autism. There were a number of kids in these classrooms who had autism, and were doing great because of the work of people like Rachel and people like Anne Marie Murphy who reached out to work with these kids. Rachel was exceptional because she integrated these kids into her daily life. She brought the kids to her home. She involved the kids in her family, and she treated these kids like family, and they matured. They did better under her care. She probably didn't know it when she died, but her best friend and her boyfriend, Tony, was about to propose to her. In fact, he had already gone to her parents to ask permission to ask her to marry him. She was going to do it on Christmas Eve, just 10 days after the incident. He didn't get to ask for Rachel's hand in marriage. Instead, the wedding ring that he had planned to present to her was placed on her finger before she was buried. Rachel was an amazing teacher, an amazing person who invested herself in these kids day in and day out. It would have been great to know what Rachel Davino was going to become as she matured as an educator. This is just a sampling of the stories from one day in Newtown, Connecticut. Less kids and adults died in Newtown that day than die every day across this country. I mean, we think of how exceptional it was and how awful and how horrific that we lost 20 kids and 6 adults. And by the way, 2 others in Adam Lanza and his mother. And yet that number is less than the average number of people who are killed every day by gun violence across this country. And so I want to talk about them too. I want to talk about just over the last couple weeks and months, what we've witnessed across this country. I want to talk about the day of Pendleton in Chicago. We've heard a lot about because for the presidential inauguration, she was here. She was performing with her school's majorette team in the presidential inauguration festivities. She loved performing. She was an honors student at King's College Prep High School in Chicago. She's 15 years old, and she's remembered by her friends as somebody who was always raising her hand in class. She had all the right answers in that chemistry class. She wore bright lip gloss that made her stand out. She danced. She loved to dance. She danced on the praise dance ministry at her church, and she was a member of her cheerleading team as well. She liked Chinese food. She loved fig Newtons. She was thinking of going to college. She was thinking about either journalism or pharmacology. Two pretty different things. Either way, she wanted to go to Harvard. She knew where she wanted to go. She was 15 years old. She was shot and killed while standing with her friends at a park in Chicago after she took her final exams, just days after she came back from Washington, D.C., probably one of the most amazing experiences of her life. I watched some of that parade, and I always think to myself whether I saw her performing in her majorette team. 15 years old. She's going to go to Harvard. She's going to become a journalist. She's a great dancer. All of the things that we missed just because she was standing in the way of a bullet at a park with her friends after she took her final exams. Think about Lavinia Williams, who in January of this year was just visiting with his mother and his two sisters in Marin City, California, to celebrate his 17th birthday. 17 years old, Lavinia was that day. And he was checking in on his sister, April, to make sure that she was fine, because there was just some suspicious activity going on that day. 39 years old, after dropping her kids off at school. Earlier this week in Akron, Ohio, was a 28-year-old man who was fatally shot while taking garbage to a trash bin in the parking lot of a McDonald's restaurant that he worked in. Taking garbage to a trash dump. He got shot. He died. His name hasn't been released, but he'd been working at that McDonald's for 10 years, and his coworkers said, quote, he was the kind of person who would give you his last dollar. He always gave his coworkers gifts on holidays, on Christmas and Thanksgiving. He worked at McDonald's. He certainly couldn't have had a lot of money to be going out and buying gifts for his coworkers, but he worked at that place for a decade. And because of his generous nature, with whatever money he had, he scraped together and made sure people knew that he loved them. 28 years old. This week, earlier this week, he died in Akron, Ohio. This stuff is happening every day. I mean, I'll keep on going through them here, but this is happening every day throughout this country. People are dying on our streets by casual gun violence. Bringing garbage to a dumpster outside of a McDonald's. Walking down the stairs to check out some commotion at your sister's housing complex. Pulling into your driveway after dropping off your kids. These were not people that were going out and looking for trouble. These were people who were just doing their regular everyday business. President Obama came to Connecticut on Monday, and he told the story of a mother who was so frustrated at the phrase regarding her daughter's death due to gun violence that her daughter was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She just happened to be in the way of a straight bullet. And her point was that, no, in fact, she was at the right place at the right time. She was walking to school. This guy was bringing garbage to the dumpster. Anne Marie was coming home after dropping off her kids. Lavinia was just looking out for his sister. They weren't in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And yet they were gunned down. And we have no answer? We're not able, after 20 years of this, to step up and do something about it, it's like raindrops. It's just become routine. So let me go back to Newtown and tell you more about these kids. Let me tell you about Olivia Rose Engel, 6 years old. Olivia was a bright-eyed brunette, 6-year-old girl. She loved school. She loved school. She particularly loved reading and math. That's good because that's a lot of what you're doing when you're in first grade, is reading and math. So if you like reading and math, you're probably in good shape. Her favorite stuffed animal was a lamb. And her favorite colors were, again, a theme you will hear throughout, especially these girls. Favorite colors were pink and purple. And she was all set to play the angel in her church's nativity play on the night of the tragedy. She laughed a lot. And her parents said that she just lit up a room when she walked in. She did a lot of things, too. Olivia played soccer and tennis, and she took art classes, and she loved swimming, and she loved her ballet classes, and she took hip-hop dance lessons. She was involved in her Daisy Girl Scouts, and she loved playing soccer as well. Every night when they'd gather for dinner, her family would have Olivia say grace. And she was a great big sister. Olivia really loved her little 3-year-old brother, Braden. She was killed that day in Sandy Hook Elementary School. Josephine Gay celebrated her 7th birthday just 3 days before the tragedy. Joey was